I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit.
Welcome to the occupation. Hang your collar up inside. Hang your freedom higher.
It's the only way to be sure.
I've heard a lot of people, many of whom hadn't seen the movie yet, call Brie Larson's Captain Marvel a Mary Sue. I don't think that's entirely fair, so I made this video to explain why. First off, we need to define terms. What exactly makes a character a Mary Sue is poorly defined. As the term has grown in usage over the last couple of decades, it's also gotten kind of muddy. Originally, it was an idealized author-insert character, generally in fanfiction, who is perfect in every way and does everything better than everyone else. But the term is broken out into the mainstream now and gets thrown around all over the place. As I alluded to in my video about Rey and strong female characters, what I mean when I use the term is any character, male or female, who lacks significant flaws or weaknesses, rarely if ever actually has to face any real adversity, and most importantly in current popular culture, a character who, rather than having to face the universe as it is and overcome whatever obstacles it presents to him or her, seems instead to always have the universe bend itself around the character. This is all too common nowadays with woke SJW strong female characters. The idea seems to be that if a female character is somehow better at one point in the story than another, if she improves or learns or becomes a better person, then she can't be a strong female character because she wasn't her best self the whole time. I don't want to rehash my earlier video, so suffice it to say that I don't care much for this kind of storytelling. I don't think every story needs to tick off every single one of the waypoints of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey to be valid. I just rarely find primary characters who don't change, learn, or have to push themselves through adversity very interesting. Now, I'm not much of a comics reader, but I have paid a fair amount of attention to what people who are really into them have said about Captain Marvel's books. As I understand it, and I could have these details wrong, Marvel has launched a new Captain Marvel series 5 times in the last 8 years, only to have to cancel each series after a relatively short run because those books weren't selling. It is also my understanding that the character is largely lacking in personality beyond being a superpowered woman who isn't going to take your sexist shit, and that despite poor sales, the character has trended more woke rather than less with each reboot. I am entirely open to the idea that this is an unfair characterization, but even at the level of SJW wokeness I have been led to understand the books are infused with is overstated, one thing seems clear to me. Captain Marvel is overpowered. Superman has been around a long time, so you'd think comics writers would understand that overpowered characters are boring. Without kryptonite or the like to put them in situations where they're genuinely at risk, tension is hard to come by. Superman has gotten around this problem by having a truly formidable enemy on frequent occasions. Lex Luthor is often able to contend with Superman by means of his genius and charisma, for instance. Superman 2, back in the 80s, put him up against 3 villains from his home planet who had the same powers that he had, plus Lex Luthor. A TV show I quite liked at first, Heroes, got caught in this same trap and ended up spending at least half its run dealing with the fallout of having made Peter overpowered. By the time the show's other flaws lost me as a viewer, the showrunners had settled into something that pretty much worked to keep Peter from just becoming a god, but it was a serious issue for a good long while, because overpowered characters are boring. So, getting on to the actual topic, it would seem that if any character was primed to be a Mary Sue, it would be Captain Marvel, especially as played by her wokeness herself, Brie Larson, and yet, I really don't think she is. This is the point at which I may start spoiling things, so if that's a problem for you, come back after you've seen the movie. The character of Captain Marvel is definitely overpowered. The big climactic battle at the end is pushed nearly to absurdity because of how stupidly overpowered she is. It mostly works anyway, despite the genuinely lousy CGI used for it, because Carol Danvers had been depowered up to that point. She realizes this and breaks free of it, and then flies through space just punching out spaceships and sending photon blasts from her fists until she scares off Ronan. You remember Ronan, right? He's the guy who yelled at and threatened Thanos when he felt aggrieved. Well, when Captain Marvel decides, for no reason that's clear while watching, that she's just going to take a break from blowing up his ships and post up in space where he can see her and hang out for a while, Ronan decides that the better part of valor is to depart with all due haste. So there's that. But that's just the climax. If the whole movie was like that, then yeah, she'd be as clear an example of a Mary Sue as has been forced on us in many a year. It makes sense that people familiar with the comic book version of her that Marvel's been trying to make a thing for the last decade would see the trailers and jump to the conclusion that she is indeed a Mary Sue. But the rest of the movie isn't like that. True, through most of the first act, she's as robotic and focused a warrior as the T-1000 in Terminator 2. Brie Larson is actually pretty good at this stuff too, so it all works pretty well. When she ends up on Earth, she doesn't appear to know she's on her own home planet or much of anything else about her past. All she knows is that she's a highly trained Kree warrior with some pretty kick-ass powers. Oh, and that she has trouble controlling her emotions. We're told this a lot. More on this later. So when she's robotically stalking Skrulls through LA, it plays. It certainly works better than her handful of attempts at snarky quips. the most amusing of which isn't what she herself says, but the deadpan way one of her compatriots explains her joke. And again, if the whole movie was like this, we'd have a Mary Sue problem. The reason I say we don't really is the stuff in between. Don't get me wrong, Captain Marvel is still largely a woke SJW female power fantasy, and the parts we're about to talk about are the ones that Brie Larson is the worst at. Genuinely bad sometimes. But one does have to take the whole work into account. And in between being a T-1000 and being a space god with fist lasers, Carol Danvers turns into a person. Mostly. Enough has been said about the tired amnesiac plot and the tepid, risk-free manner in which this movie rolls it out. But one thing it does allow is for Carol Danvers to have a freak-out of sorts. She actually has a moment of crisis. It's not an overwhelming one. She doesn't lose it completely and turn into a blubbering mess. That would never happen, for obvious reasons. But there's a turning point in the second act where, between the accumulation of knowledge she's gained about herself and the difficult decisions she has to make, she has a fairly significant fit of emotion and self-doubt. She cries and needs support. She actually feels kind of like a human being for a while, as much as Brie Larson and a crappy script can manage it anyway. This is not Mary Sue-like behavior. Showing weakness is not allowed for woke SJW strong female characters. So credit where due that the filmmakers gave her this. The movie would have been a lot better, if she'd done it more, truth be told. The big confrontation with Jan Rog at the end would genuinely have landed the way the storyboard wanted it to if the script, direction, and Larson's performance had actually shown us that she did indeed have an issue controlling her emotions. But it never ever does. Her freakout isn't even that serious. It's a good moment and a welcome one, but it's not like it makes us think she's about to lose it or back down from the fight. Instead, the script just repeatedly tells us that she has this weakness. It even turns it into a joke when she herself tells Fury that she gets in trouble for it and he sarcastically responds that he can tell. Or at least, I assumed that it was supposed to be a joke and not just another example of the script trying to tell us what her weakness is and missing the mark. No, her real weakness is that she doesn't know who she is and that she's been lied to. As weaknesses go, these are not a way out of Mary Sue status. Weaknesses that are clearly outside a character's control are in fact a fairly common Mary Sue problem. But she does actually do what she can to overcome them, and when push comes to shove, she feels it. Rather than just rolling with it and moving on to the next time the universe will distort itself for her benefit, she actually feels it. On a related note, when Jude Law started spewing exposition about her emotional control issue at the beginning of the movie, I was all set to get an "I learned my emotions are my strength and to embrace them" style moral from this movie. For all that it's largely a paint-by-numbers formulaic plot, I have to give additional credit to the producers for not going down this road. That was a setup for the big empowering moment at the end. Instead, the trope itself was thankfully left out. And as I said, had the story been told better, that big empowerment moment would have been pretty wicked. It's still pretty okay, just not what it could have been. Lastly, Carol Danvers actually does something to earn her powers. I did not see this coming. It's not even trivial. She does something simply because it's the right thing to do that any sane person would have expected would result in her own death. She could not know that, instead of killing her, it would infuse her with the power of an Infinity Stone. I think it's fair to say she earned her powers more than a lot of superheroes, male or female, that we all know and love. So that's a big plus for the character in my book. So no, I don't think Captain Marvel is a true Mary Sue. There's definitely some degree of Mary Sue-ness simply by virtue of how overpowered she is. But the story allows her to be less than perfect and have moments of weakness. She actually faces some measure of adversity and overcomes it on her own before turning into an effectively invincible demigod. Carol Danvers is no Ripley, Buffy, or Princess Leia, but she's already closer to being a legitimate strong female character in one movie than Rey has managed in two. Given a better star and a better script, this could have been a very good movie. Instead, it's merely okay. I don't think MCU fans will feel like they wasted their money if they go see it, but it's in no way necessary to see before Endgame. Brie Larson is not a good fit for the parts of this character that make her worth watching, and the direction and script are too timid and dull for it to really shine. If they really do plan to push Captain Marvel to the forefront of the MCU and expect to keep fans like me coming to these movies after Endgame, they need to clean house. Get the scripts right, let the director take some chances, and recast the role. Happily, they have an easy out for the last part. I am given to understand that the original incarnation of Captain Marvel was Monica Rambeau. Well, Monica is in this movie, and she will be just the right age to become leader of the Avengers come 2020.